Who breaks up fights at bars? Big, strong men. Who starts fights? Insecure people who don't like themselves. So I think strength immediately moves to protection. And then the third thing, and I get more pushback on this, is procreation.
Not on this show you won't, Scott. Don't worry. What are men for? We've been having a debate for a while about the falling fortunes of the modern man and the difficult conditions facing young men in particular.
The single biggest killer of men under the age of 40 is themselves. It's suicide.
Boys and men are falling behind in several different areas.
There's about 1 million fewer young men now enrolled in college as compared to 2011.
Are they radicalized and toxic? And just what is masculinity anyway?
Most masculine I've ever felt is after the birth of my first child.
The definition of true manhood is love, protect, cherish, defend, provide for your wife and for your family.
And the masculine perspective is you have to understand that life is war.
My guest this week has a lot of thoughts on this subject and a lot of advice for our fellow men. He's a professor at N.Y.U's Stern School of Business. He's the impresario behind the Prof G media universe. And he's the author of a new book that answers all of these questions. Notes on Being a Man. Scott Galloway, welcome to Interesting Times. I think at this point, probably most people listening or watching are familiar with some of the basic information on the condition of young men in America. And so I want to not dive into that data, but start at a more personal level. You are a teacher, you're a father, you're a podcaster. Just in your personal life, how did you first get the sense that young men in America were in a kind of trouble?
Well, it was a specific moment that kind of sort of, I don't know, lit the candle, if you will. And it was during COVID, and a young man named Alex Kearns was trading options on Robinhood. And he got what ultimately ended up being an errant message saying that he owed them thousands of dollars. And he spent most of the night sending panicked emails to an unresponsive Robinhood who, wants to scale so there's no humans. And then in the morning, he decided that he didn't want to leave his family with that burden, and he took his own life. And you see this kid, Ross. Do you have kids?
I have a number of kids, yes.
Well, occasionally you see something and you see a picture of a kid and you're like, that's my boy.
Yeah. And you have two sons, right?
Yeah, I have two sons. And that happened to me. And it was very, occasionally something, and this is the power of media, it just kind of reached into my soul and grabbed me. And I just started doing some research on it, and I just found, a lot of data about the challenges facing young men. In this instance, the kind of unrelenting foe of big tech that every day is trying to figure out 1 million times a second a way to get you on a screen 1 more second. And the young, immature prefrontal cortices of men is especially vulnerable. And big tech, which is 40% of our S&P right now, essentially has one job, and that's to separate or sequester young men from their relationships, which is key to a mammal's health. And I worry that we're evolving a new species of asocial, asexual males. And if you go back 4 years, it is receiving a lot of attention now, which is really rewarding. But it wasn't 4 years ago. When I went to the Democratic Convention in Chicago just a couple of years ago, I saw a parade of special interest groups articulating all the very real issues different special interest groups still face. I didn't hear one word about the cohort that has fallen further faster than any cohort in American history, and that's young men. And so that was kind of the moment where I started going down this rabbit hole, if you will.
Yeah. So take us back in time in your own life, because your book about this subject is partially analysis and prescription, but a lot of it is personal story and memoir, right? So you're 61, right? Can you believe that, Ross? An exceptionally well-preserved 61, I must say. And so you came of age about 15 years before I did, so in the 70s and 80s. Mm-hmm. And what do you think was different in the male experience then?
Well, first, that's a generous question. I relate a lot to these struggling young men because I think I could have very easily, with a few wrong turns or bad decisions or lack of infrastructure, could have really come off the tracks. My father was not involved in my life. I was raised by a single immigrant mother who lived and died a secretary. I feel like America back then, Ross, loved the unremarkable. I got assisted lunch. I always say I'm a product of big government. And, by the way, this is not a humble brag. I'm a remarkably talented person. I may be even a 1%er, but that puts me in a room with 75 million other people. My life, my wealth, my opportunities are well above the 75 millionth most blessed person. And I reverse engineer those things to several factors that aren't my fault. First and foremost, the irrational passion, my well-being of my mother. But more than that, maybe even I was smart enough to be born in America, and especially California in the 60s as a white heterosexual male. I got assisted lunch. I applied to UCLA, Ross, when it had a 74% admissions rate, and I was one of the 26% that didn't get in. And I was installing shelving for what seemed like a lot of money at the time, $18 an hour, and I came home one day and I just broke down. And I said to my mom, I was living with my mom, this is my life. And not that there's anything wrong with vocational work, but I wanted to be a doctor at the time. At that moment, I thought I was going to be I had aspirations to be a pediatrician. And she said, well, is there something we can do? And I found out there's something called an appeal process, and I wrote an appeal, and the truth has a nice ring to it. I said, I want to be a doctor, and I'm installing shelving right now. And I remember the call, someone from the admissions office at UCLA called me and said, you're not qualified, but you're a native son of California, and we're going to give you a shot. And I got through UCLA with showing up with a 1984 Honda Accord and $60 and $4,500 in student loans. My tuition was $1,200 a year. And then I graduated. I rewarded the generosity of California taxpayers and the regents of UC with a 2.27 GPA, which, just for your listeners, Ross, is not very good.
It's not it's above a 2.
It's above a 2.
It's better than a 2.
It's enough to graduate. They did give me the same diploma everyone else got. And this is the crazy part. Berkeley, arguably the finest public institution in America, let me into graduate school. And like a lot of men, I quite frankly, I just didn't get my act together until I was about 25, 26. And it kind of inspired an upward spiral of prosperity. And I worry now that what we're trying to do in America is identify a super class of freakishly remarkable young kids who play lacrosse and find time to build wells or have platforms helping the mental health of kids all over the world, or are the children of rich kids, and turn them into billionaires. And I think America has lost the script. I think the whole point of America is to give unremarkable kids a shot at being remarkable or doing something important. And I feel like I had that infrastructure. And I worry that in today's world, a lot of that infrastructure has been crammed into the kids who already demonstrate the remarkable at the age of 18.
Yeah, there's a couple places I'd like to go with that. But just one point is sort of the idea of slow development and grace. Because to me, when you tell that story, I don't think you're unremarkable. But it does sound like you were a kid who needed time and space and opportunity that wasn't there at age 16 or 18 and ended up being there. So just talk about that for a minute. Like, is the big difference sort of the space that society allows between the ages of 15 and 30 for people to screw up or find themselves? Is that a big change that's disadvantaged men?
I would argue the primary education system is biased against boys. Boys are twice as likely to be suspended. And once a boy is suspended twice, he's probably not going to college. Think about the way we approach what we ask for students in school. Sit still, be a pleaser, raise your hand. You just described the activities that come more easily to a girl. Even push a pencil around, ask questions. Our prefrontal cortex is 18 months behind a girl's. So, and then you have a kid who, quite frankly, may be not ready for college, and the traditional on-ramps to a middle-class life, a lot of those on-ramps have been closed. You know, we all knew that kid in high school. He wasn't going to go to college, but he could fix your mom's car. And there was wood shop, auto shop, metal shop. Those have gone away. They've been replaced with computer science and Mandarin courses. And we've all decided as parents that if our kid can make $80,000 a year at the age of 19 installing energy-efficient HVAC heaters, that somehow you failed if they don't end up at MIT. So we kind of have this one path of success that's been driven into families, and there's a certain amount of shame. And then you have my industry, which has embraced this bullshit rejectionist LVMH strategy of artificially constraining supply such that we can brag that we turn away 90% of our applicants.
Your industry being higher ed.
Yeah, it's morally corrupt. Dartmouth has an $8 billion endowment, lets in 1,100 kids a year. They could let in 11,000. It's in the middle of nowhere. They have the infrastructure. They have the money. And by the way, there would not be any degradation in the quality of those freshmen. But once people have a degree or a housing permit or a house, and this is the virus that infects America, they pull up the gates behind them because it makes their degree and their house worth more. How many times have you heard someone, Ross, say, I would never get into the college I went to if I applied now?
I hear that occasionally as a parent of younger teenagers.
And what that means is your daughter's not getting in. And we have to flip the script. But maybe he does go, or she go to college for 1 or 2 years, borrows a lot of money, decides it's not for them, drops out. And what is one of the few forms of debt that is not dischargeable in bankruptcy? Student debt. They drop out, and this debt haunts them the rest of their lives. In addition, the transfer of wealth could reasonably called a transfer from the rich and the middle class, or the poor and the middle class to the rich. But more than anything, the transfer has really been from the young to the old. Who owns homes and stocks? People our age. Who rents and makes their money from current income and wages? Young people.
Right. But so those are things, though, student loans, cost of housing, and so on, right? Those affect men and women both, right? Both men and women
100%.
Are going into debt. Both men and women are struggling to buy homes. But on the question of men in particular, you mentioned earlier going to the Democratic Convention and hearing sort of people talking about all kinds of identity groups and their struggles and not talking about men. I think it's very clear from the perspective of people at the Democratic Convention why they're thinking that way. They listen to your story where you say, I was lucky to be born a white heterosexual man in 1960s America. And they say, damn right. White heterosexual men had all kinds of unfair advantages. They were propped up in various ways by what gets called patriarchy.
Yep.
Those advantages have gone away. And now men are struggling, right? But, didn't everyone else have to struggle for hundreds and hundreds of years? Why can't men deal with it? And I'm curious how much of what you experienced, the advantages you feel like you experienced growing up, are connected to unfair advantages, sexism, and so on. And what isn't? Like, what is the thing you can pull out of the 60s and 70s and say, this is still something we can have in a more egalitarian America?
That is 100% fair. And when it's very easy as a younger man to credit your grit and your character for your success and blame the market for your failures. And I didn't really recognize until I was in my 40s. I raised hundreds of millions of dollars for my startups in the 90s. And it didn't dawn on me that there weren't any gay people or non-whites or women raising money from venture capitalists. The question is, should a 19-year-old male being raised by a single mother pay the penalty for my privilege? Because things have changed dramatically. It's just no longer, the advantages I had just are no longer nearly as distinct. And maybe there's even some disadvantage to being a young male. And just going back to, I want to touch on what you said, that the economic challenges facing young people face men and women, 100% true. But this is the bottom line, and I don't think we like to admit this. Beyonce could work at Kentucky Fried Chicken and marry Jay-Z. The opposite is not true. Young women are disproportionately and unfairly evaluated on their aesthetics. Young men are disproportionately and unfairly evaluated on their economic viability. Young men get much, if not most, of their identity from their professional or economic success or lack thereof. So while I agree with you, and I think the solutions should be focused or gender neutral, focused on lifting up all young people, it has disproportionately negatively impacted young men.
But then maybe they can't be gender neutral. I mean, I think part of why you're an interesting figure, right, is that you make a lot of arguments that are right now sort of seen as conservative and conservative-coded arguments. A lot of things that you say about the struggles of men are things that you hear from conservative writers, conservative thinkers, and sort of the manosphere in their crudest form, right?
Yeah.
And you, as I watch you, I feel like you have these views and you're trying to stay liberal that. I mean, maybe that's unfair, but that's what I see in Scott Galloway. But it seems like what you're describing is a landscape where there's some set of advantages that men used to have that you can just say were unfair, and it's good that they're gone. But then at the same time, when you say, look, men need more time to develop, male teenagers are just the weaker sex in educational settings compared to women and so on, right? It does seem like there's certain things that your theory needs to favor that would be sort of pro-male in a particular way, and in a way that would, by their critics on the left, get called the return of patriarchy or something like that. What do you think about that?
It's a really fair point. And to be fair, the far right saw the problem first. They realized that something was wrong in Mudville with young men, and they saw them first. The problem was their answer was to take women and non-whites back to the 50s. And some of the initial voices that filled the void were really negative voices, just cosplaying empathy, but what they really were was just thinly veiled misogyny in a form of masculinity that was coursing our discourse. And the first thing I always feel, my land acknowledgement is the following. Women don't have an obligation to service men romantically, sexually. This is not women's fault. One of the greatest victories in America and society generally is that women are thriving. And men should take pride in that and be the afterburners for our sisters and our mothers and our daughters' success. The far left's answer to this problem, quite frankly, is you don't have problems, you are the problem. You've had a 3,000-year head start. Deal with it. Now deal with the crap we've been dealing with forever. And quite frankly, what's the solution for young men from the left? Act more like a woman. And I don't think that's helpful either. So I think there has to be something in the middle. And I think it's very progressive to talk about empathy and lifting up groups.
But in your story, in education, right, alone, it sounds like you do need something that is just effectively a different track for men. And maybe in the way, we talk about this a lot with women in terms of how do you make the workplace compatible with pregnancy and motherhood. And it seems like you're saying, in the same way, we need to think about how to make the modern educational system compatible with boys whose brains develop more slowly and the need for men to have an extra 5 years in effect? Is that the argument?
Let's go to solutions. I believe we should redshirt kindergartners. I think boys should start kindergarten at 6. They're 18 months behind. Okay, let's true up the cognitive abilities. Start them at 6, girls start at 5. Let's do a better job. Let's raise wages for teachers and do a better job of recruiting men into primary schools. Simple stuff like pay for after-school sports coaching, which is disproportionately men. Compensate them for those extra hours. I think mandatory national service would be hugely beneficial for patriotism, for America, and for young men and women. A lot of young men, quite frankly, they just lack purpose.
So you're taking, just stay on that idea for a second.
Sure.
So the idea is you're taking, let's say, somewhere in the 18 to 22-year-old zone, whether it's a guy who isn't ready to go to college or a guy who's graduating college or hasn't finished, it doesn't have purpose, and you're saying, okay, you need this extra 2 years of development and you need something to do in that time.
Anything from being in the military to being smoke jumpers to elder care to senior care to donating time at a no-kill animal shelter. I think America needs a lot of talented young people who understand technology to get out there and spend time with other Americans. I think
that's it. You just gave a nice gender-neutral sounding description, right? But it is, if it's the men you're worried about, right? It's, I think in your story it's the smoke jumpers, right? Like it's. The problem you're trying to solve is more likely to be solved by the smoke jumpers than the no-kill animal shelter, right? Is that fair?
What I'm trying to do,
I'm not trying to make you.
I understand, but I'm trying to come up with a series of solutions that are more politically palatable that have a chance of being enacted. And I also want to recognize that a lot of the things I talk about are challenges for young women as well as young men. But I think there's a series of programs to lift up young people that would disproportionately help young men because a lot of the benefits have been taken away and have been especially detrimental to young men.
Why don't you like the term toxic masculinity?
I don't think there's any such thing. I think there's coarseness and cruelty and criminal behavior. But I think masculinity is strength, service, stoicism, demonstrating strengths and skills such that you can establish resources and strength such that you can then protect others. I think it's optimizing for service, not for attention. And unfortunately, a lot of criminal, violent, psychopathic behavior has been conflated with masculinity. I don't think there's any such thing, just as I don't think there's any such thing as toxic femininity.
But so I don't like how the phrase toxic masculinity gets used. But I think it can be a useful phrase because of what it implies, right? It implies that there are vices that maybe are not exclusive to men, but are disproportionately male. Men are more violent than women and so on, right? But then that there are also virtues that are, again, not unique to men, but are sort of associated with masculinity in certain ways. Now, I think you were just describing some of them. And in the book, you have the 3 Ps. To me, it's your description of virtuous masculinity. So tell me what the 3 Ps are.
So provider. I think a decent goal for a young man starting his career is, in a capitalist society, just acknowledge the way the world is, and that if you want an absence of anxiety, if you want health care, if you want to be attractive to a mate, you're going to need to have a plan to make yourself economically viable. And that might be getting a trades license, getting a bachelor's of arts, just working real hard, just whatever it might be, that you're going to need a plan to be economically viable. And by the way, that plan will change, but you have a responsibility to develop some sense of a plan for economic viability in a capitalist society. Once you develop a series of strengths, it can be character, it can be kindness, it can be economic power. The next move is to protection. It's a tragedy to me that women don't feel safe on the New York subway. Women shouldn't cross the street when they see a group of young men. They should cross the street to be around young men. Your job is to protect. Who breaks up fights at bars? Big, strong men. Who starts fights? Insecure people who don't like themselves. So I think strength immediately moves to protection. And then the third thing, and I get more pushback on this, is procreation.
Not on this show, you won't, Scott. Don't worry.
Well, I think we need to stop demonizing and start celebrating young men's horniness. It makes them better men. It makes them want to shower. It makes them want to have an economic plan. It makes them want to have girlfriends so they can figure out a way to behave around other women. It makes you kinder. My first girlfriend told me that if I didn't stop smoking pot every night, she was going to stop having sex with me. And guess what? I stopped smoking pot. A movement I hate, Ross, I hate the incel movement. I think it is such bullshit. This notion that women have such high standards that they can never be successful. Well, welcome to the work week, boss. For 99% of history, 99% of men have been involuntarily celibate for 99% of the time. There are a few men that wouldn't rather be doing something else more right now than having sex. And it's a motivator for us to be better men. No man has the right to reproduce. You got to work for it. And I hate this movement where men throw up a BS excuse and they abdicate and they stop putting in the time and the effort and the energy to be better men that are more attractive to women who understandably are raising their standards because they're no longer economically indentured to men and they're excelling. And so they have the right to have higher standards.
So the incel movement and everything associated with it is pretty much by definition a movement for men who feel like they're not succeeding generally. For men who are succeeding, right, who are sort of attractive in the dating pool, if you're telling them, go out, have sex, be horny, whatever, right, whatever else, how do you get that to be connected to protection and providing rather than just being a different P, right, which is predatory, right? And I don't mean, to be clear, I don't mean like rape and sexual assault predation. I just
being
mean
a player that's not feeling.
Just treating women badly in a dating market that benefits you because all these other men are failing.
What I would say is that, one, you're talking about a minority of people, and
not all men, right? You know, as they say.
Look, well, men not doing well and struggling with their career or their romantic possibilities, I think that applies to 95% of men at some point in their life. I know it applied to me for a large portion of my life. I don't know about you, but there's definitely moments in my life where I was insecure about my professional and romantic success and opportunities.
Never true for me, Scott. Never.
No.
Not even
not
once.
you, Ross.
Never.
But what I would suggest is that we need more third places. Men aren't going into work. People aren't going to church or to temple or to mosque. There are no venues anymore for young people to fall in love with what I'll call non-curb appeal, non-Brad Pitt remarkable men. If you talk to couples that have been together longer than 30 years, 80% of them will say one was much more interested in the other in the beginning, and it was usually the man who was much more interested. But this is what happened. I saw the way he treated his parents at church. He was funny. I liked his friends. He was great at his job. So I think that the problem around mating and connection and falling in love, there's very few romances that mimic a romantic comedy where they bump into each other in a bookstore and there's this wild gaze into each other's eyes. It usually doesn't pan out that way.
Listen, I spent hours, weeks hanging out in bookstores. Waiting
to
for
find Julia
that to
Roberts.
happen. Now, I was in the fantasy and science fiction section, so maybe I had chosen poorly, but yes, I agree. But so is the argument then that basically if you have this sort of potentially predatory male elite that's doing well, one of the best ways to fix that problem is to elevate the rest of the male population so they feel more pressure to be good guys?
I think you're talking about a small slice of the dating market because the incentive system is the following. There's research on what attracts a woman to a man as a mate or sexually. The number one thing, we don't like to talk about this, is signaling resources. Women naturally feel they might be vulnerable during gestation. They want to protect her. And in a capitalist society, strength oftentimes is conflated with resources. Now, the good news is you don't have to show up with a Range Rover and a Panerai, which is a good rap, but the key word in that is signal resources. So are you the guy that has a plan, that leaves the bar at 11 because you have work the next day, is organized, is thoughtful, disciplined, has a plan, trying to better himself? That is very attractive to women. Number two is intelligence. And again, all of this is anthropological. The person who makes better decisions for his family, that family is more likely to survive. And the fastest way, by the way, to communicate intelligence is humor. And you can't tell someone to be funny, but what I tell men is laugh out loud. A great sense of humor is being funny, but that's hard. But it's also just laughing out loud and laughing at yourself and not being easily offended. And the secret weapon that women are most attracted to in a relationship is kindness. They want someone they know that if they're vulnerable is going to be good to them. And I think young men, and I think it can be learned. I think a kindness practice can make you kinder.
Whose job is it to teach them? Who is teaching young men the 3 Ps that you describe?
So what's the infrastructure for healthy masculinity, productive masculinity, and loving, secure households and good men?
Where does it come from, especially in a society where there's lots of divorce, lots of men are raised without fathers? Like, where does it come from for someone who's in the position you were in, right? Divorced, your father's not in the picture. How do you transmit?
Well, you said it. It comes from you and me, Ross. If you look
I was afraid of that. Yeah.
If you look at the bricks and mortar of what builds good men or not, it can be reverse engineered to a single point of failure. You know, in air disasters, they try and reverse everything to what is the single point of failure here? The single point of failure for when a boy comes off the tracks is when he loses a male role model through death, divorce, or abandonment. And the moment a boy loses a male role model, at that moment, he becomes more likely to be incarcerated than graduate from college. And what's interesting is that girls in single-parent homes aren't nearly as affected. They have similar rates of high school graduation, similar rates of self-harm. Now, they're more promiscuous because they're looking for male attention in the wrong places, but generally speaking, they have the same rates of success as dual-parent homes. What it ends up is that while boys are physically stronger, they're emotionally and neurologically much weaker than girls. And even acknowledging that boys need men 5 years ago was triggering for the far left. It was what, women can't raise boys? I was raised by a single immigrant mother, lied of my life, but she immediately got men involved. And
who were those men? Like, who were the most important men in your life growing up?
I still stay in contact with some of my mom's boyfriends. There was a guy across the hall who noticed that I was being raised by a single mother, and he used to come over with his girlfriend and say, we're going horseback riding. Do you want to come with us? I joined the Boy Scouts. Larry Nobler, a chemistry teacher, used to invite me over to wash his cars with his boys. Immediately, there were men involved. And unfortunately, because of, I don't know if it's Michael Jackson or the Catholic Church, there's a lot of men in their 30s who are wonderful young men who have paternal and fraternal love to give and are reticent to express interest in mentoring a teen boy for fear they'll be suspected of something. And so they're reticent to get involved.
I mean, there is also a dynamic, right, where it sounds like you were fortunate, but where, you know, boys with single mothers, the boyfriends do not always treat those boys well, right? Like there are dangers to boys from non-parental male mentors that aren't just about sexual abuse.
Well, the likely sexual abuser is a step-parent, right? But what I would say is, while those examples get a lot of, as they should, outsized attention, there's a lot of good stepdads. It just comes down, the base, beyond the economic policies, primary education fixes, vocational programming, national service. The number one solve for this problem is that if we want better men, we have to be better men. I think the outer ring of masculinity is to get involved in the life of a child that isn't yours.
One more question on politics and your own relationship to liberalism and progressivism, and then I have just couple economic questions. But on politics, like, I'm a conservative. If you tell me that we need to teach young men that they should be providers, protectors, and that they should procreate, I'm all in. But I know lots of people, lots of parents who don't consider themselves part of the far left, who just consider themselves sort of, normal, liberal, progressive people who I think would just be kind of allergic to that formulation that says, oh, there's something distinctive about protection that we want to teach our sons that's maybe different from what we teach our daughters. Imagine someone who isn't on the far left, but they're just they're a Kamala Harris voter. They're like, really? Isn't that just bringing back patriarchy, Scott?
I think it's a fair criticism. I think one of the things I got wrong in the book was that I reverse engineered my success to having money and finding a mate. And the reality is that isn't a whole shooting match. And if I could write, about the moment you write the book, you're like satisfied for 2 minutes, and then you start thinking about everything you got wrong. And social media is really good at helping you identify those things. I think if I were to add in some additional dimensions, it would be 1, service, and 2, I love the idea of the notion, Richard Reeves, the test of becoming a man isn't a religious ceremony or a birthday, it's surplus value. At what point do you create more economic value or tax revenue than you absorb? Are you the dude that more people complain to than you issue complaints? Do you love more people than love you? Do you protect more people than protect you? The idea of getting to surplus value. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be the CEO of Goldman Sachs or be a baller and have a lot of money or date a lot or have a lot of sex. I think if I did it again, I would have focused more on service and surplus value.
But you're still trying to pull progressives towards, I guess, just a slightly less gender interchangeable view of the sexes. I think that's
95%.
I think that's what you're trying to do.
Look, okay.
No matter what, hostile reactions you got.
Put a bunch of 8-year-old boys and 8-year-old girls in a room, put dolls and cars and Hot Wheels in a room and see what happens. And I think that talking about politics, I've advised a lot of Democratic candidates running for president. They all claim they're not running for president, but they want my views. Anyways, I think there needs to be an era of renewal, a renewal of alliances between America and Europe, a renewal of alliances between moderate Republicans and Democrats. But the greatest alliance in history that is in most desperate need of renewal is the alliance between men and women. And I have 7.5 billion points of data to show it's the greatest alliance in history. The genders have done a great job.
It's carried us a long way so far. Yeah.
The genders have each done a great job of blaming the other for their own problems. It is time to realize empathy is not a zero-sum game. Civil rights did not hurt white people. Gay marriage didn't hurt heteronormative marriage. Women and our society aren't going to continue to flourish if men are flailing. Let's celebrate young men the way we have finally and deservedly started celebrating young women.
Okay, let's now a pessimistic economic question. I look at the data for job creation, and the American economy is creating jobs in healthcare sectors, service sectors. It's creating jobs that right now are disproportionately held by, and the people disproportionately interested in them are women. But it does seem like there is something anti-male about the trajectory of the economy. And you either need the economy to be different, or you need lots and lots of men who are willing to become nurses. And I'm just curious what you think about that as just sort of like where we're going. Whatever we do with mentorship or anything else, we're going to a world where the future of work is currently female coded. What do you do about that?
Well, one, that's true. And some of that is, if women make better lawyers and doctors, then they deserve the economic accoutrements of that. So a couple things. One, solutions.
But the question is, like, if men right now, if there's tremendous opportunities in nursing,
right,
and men,
understood,
for that, trucks and dolls reason you just described, aren't enthusiastic about nursing, what do we do about it?
I think just as we've been successful, it's somewhat degendering leadership roles in companies, and recognize that women bring great attributes and leadership skills. And we've seen the number of female C executives increase dramatically over the last 20 years. We need to degender some of the healthcare. And I don't know if that's a marketing campaign or what it is, but it's ridiculous that in any way it's less masculine to be a nurse. I'm less sanguine as you are, less pessimistic, because I think all of the CapEx spend, mostly tied to AI, is going to create a boom in vocational jobs and trades jobs, which disproportionately benefit young men.
Good. So, all right, that was my follow-up question. What does AI mean for the economic picture for men? So say more about that. Is the AI era good for young men?
Well, okay, so I'm an AI optimist. I think all the catastrophizing about the job apocalypse is basically fundraising and techno-narcissism, that I've built something so incredible it's going to destroy the economy, so invest in this round and get rich while the world crumbles. It's total bullshit. I think like every technical innovation in history, it's going to have short-term job destruction, just as automation did destroy some jobs on the factory floor, but we didn't anticipate heated seats and car stereos, and there's more people working in the automotive industry than pre-automation. I think AI is going to create more jobs than it destroys. A record number of new business permits were issued. I believe it's going to create more jobs
but on the
than it destroys.
The kind of jobs, you talked about trades, right? So again, let's in a world where men do not yet all want to be nurses, is there something that this new economy offers them that wasn't being offered 5 years ago or 10 years ago?
We're going to have tens of thousands of open jobs for just the anticipated nuclear power plants we need to build. We're going to need pipe fitters. I mean, we're going to spend more money building data centers next year than building office buildings. And we're going to need tradespeople there. I would say the biggest opportunity for a young man or woman right now is to go find a small business in trades, whether it's hanging curtains or installing soapstone marble, if you're good at the carpet cleaning, and find the local business in your area. And there's a very good chance it's being run by a baby boomer whose kids don't want to take over the business. There's going to be enormous opportunity in small businesses and trades jobs for all young people, but those businesses do disproportionately attract young men. So I think I'm actually quite optimistic.
But there's a tension, right? Because clearly AI also feeds into everything that you started out in this conversation by describing, the way that, tech is addictive, immersive, it keeps you in your room, it feeds you slop, you scroll all the time, right? So it sounds like in your telling, AI is giving opportunities, but you still need a world where the young men can actually take them and not just be further captivated by their gambling app and streaming video and porn, right? Bespoke pornography, whatever else AI generates.
There's competing forces. If you're motivated, can get out of the house, have the discipline to develop a skill, I think the future actually looks pretty bright.
Let's end with your own sons. Tell me, you can tell me anything, but I'd like to know, one, how you think they're doing. One is in high school and one's going off to college, right? And two, what, for them in particular, don't generalize, be specific. What are you most worried about?
I come from a position of privilege because a lot of the things we talk about are largely assuaged or abated with money, is the reality. And Look, I just
sure, but I come from a position of privilege too, and I have a lot of kids, sons and daughters, and every family has temptations and issues and inherited things, and I just want to know, in the Galloway family, what do you worry about?
Oh, hands down, the phone. Biggest source of tension and anxiety. I wrote a book on big tech. I'm considered someone who understands more than your average bear about technology. The phone is the biggest source of anxiety in our household. I joke, my youngest.
How old is he?
He's 15.
Yeah.
And he's better now, but during COVID.
When did he get a phone?
Way too early. Way too early. I screwed up. And during COVID, he developed device addiction. And he's, sometimes, I won't say which son, but one of them would fake stomach problems to go in the bathroom to be on TikTok and lock the door. And I jokingly say I would bang on the door and say, start masturbating and get out of there. Look, the phone, the biggest challenge facing my kids is addiction from godlike technology that's tested 1 billion times a day, that has connected shareholder value to sequestering you from the key relationships in your life. The most encouraging thing, or one of the most encouraging things, just happened to me. I just took my kid to orientation at UVA. I dropped him at his dorm. He hugged me, shoved me out of the door, and I realized that I had achieved what I'm supposed to achieve, and that is I am now obsolete.
For now. For
now. We'll see.
For 6 months.
Until the tuition from next semester rolls in.
Well, or until, I feel like there have been moments when my dad has felt successfully obsolete in my own life. And then there have been moments when, even as an adult, he's become incredibly important once again. So I imagine that you and I will both go through that. But I think that's a good place to close. I hope your son has a fantastic time. And thanks for joining me, Scott.
Thank you, Ross, and congrats on your success. You're everywhere in my feed right now, so well done.
Well, it's the 3 Ps, Scott.
There you go.
Take care. Thanks again for being with us this week. Next week, sadly, is my last episode as host of Interesting Times, and I'll be interviewing Brian Johnson, a man famous for his quest to live forever. I hope you'll watch or listen, or both. I wanted to take this opportunity to thank everyone who has been part of this show's audience so far. And since we're still living in interesting times, the show will be back with new episodes in the fall.